Hello everyone, welcome back. And today it's a pronunciation lesson, but it's a little bit different because we're going to look at the pronunciation of numbers, and not just basic numbers, of course, but more advanced numbers, tricky numbers. So large numbers, years, dimensions, fractions, decimals, that kind of thing. So if that sounds like it could be useful for you, please consider subscribing to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment below. Right, so I think it's a good idea to start with a medium level number just to check that you're confident with your hundreds. So have a look at this number. How would you say that? It's 526. Always remember to use your and between your hundreds and your tens. Okay, let's take it a step further. How would you say this number? It's 28,526. Now remember that the hundreds and the thousands are actually said in singular form. So I don't say 28,000s, I say 28,526. Are you ready to level up? Look at this big number. How would you say that? I'll give you a few seconds. It's 6,303,520. 6,303,520. Wow, that's quite big. Let's go bigger still. Now, I know this isn't the kind of number you're going to see every day. And usually when we're this big, we're going to use other constructions like nearly or around. You probably won't be quite so specific, but I want you to know how to do it. So take a look at this number and think about how you would pronounce this. It is 1,853,202,105. 1,853,202,105. Wow, that is a huge number. But like I said, probably you might say something like 1.8 or 1.9 billion or nearly 2 billion. But I want you to know how to pronounce these very big numbers because you need to know how to do it. If we're going to consider ourselves advanced, I don't want you to feel intimidated by these very big numbers. And if you break it down, deal with each comma one at a time, you will have a system to deal with these very big numbers. Okay, but if you are put on the spot and it's in the middle of a presentation or something like that, then there's nothing wrong with saying 1.8 billion. That is fine, but I want you to be able to say it. I actually have a fun fact for you about billions. So before 1974, the British and the Americans disagreed over what 1 billion looked like. So the British used to consider 1 billion to have 12 zeros, not 9. But luckily, they all adapted to the American usage, and now it's accepted as 1,000 million, and that is to say 9 zeros. Okay, so we all agree. But before that, there was some disagreement about how many zeros 1 billion should have. So there you go, a little bit of extra trivia for you. Okay, let's move away from big numbers and onto dates. Now, we're not going to look at the basic dates like 1985. You know how to say those. You break them down into two figures, 19 and then 85. But let's look at some dates which people ask me more about. They have doubts or they say them incorrectly. So let's have a look at this first one. How would you pronounce this as a date? Not a number, as a date. So this would be pronounced 1502. 1502. And this applies to all the dates where there's a zero as that third figure. So it would be the same if it was 1409 or 1605 or 1903. The only exception is after the new millennium, so from the year 2000, and we'll look at that in a minute. But before we do, have a look at this date. How would you say that? So we would pronounce this as 1900. 1900. So, and again, that's going to apply for all of these turn of the century dates. So 1600, 1700, 1800, 1900. Again, the exception begins from the year 2000, the new millennium, when our pronunciation changed. I don't know why, but it did. And we'll look at that now. So how would you pronounce this date? I'll give you a clue. There is only one correct way to pronounce this. It's 2002. All of the years between the year 2000 and 2009, we have to say them the long way. There is no other form to say the dates from the year 2000 to 2009. It's always 2000 and. But when we began a new decade, some new rules or new pronunciation patterns, shall we say, came into being. So how would you say this date? Well, the good news is there are two ways to say this, and we can either say 2012 or 2012. Both pronunciations are correct, so you can choose whatever you feel more comfortable with. Anything from 2010 or 2010 onwards, we can say two ways. The next number or figures we have to pronounce is a price. How would you say this? So we would say £17.25 or £17.25. Okay, and it doesn't matter what currency you use, it's going to be the same rule. So I could say €17.25 or $35.20. Okay, the rules stay the same whichever currency you use. So that's some good news. Moving on to dimensions. How would you pronounce this as a dimension? Okay, what does that X? More importantly, how would we pronounce that X? We would pronounce this as 20 centimeters by 30 centimeters. And if we change the measurement units to meters or inches, it's still going to be the same. So 4 meters by 5 meters. So when we're talking about dimensions, that little X is pronounced as by. So sticking with dimensions, how would you pronounce this? So we would pronounce this as 4 square meters to describe the area of something like a room. If you were reading a property brochure or something like that, then you would see the room sizes as 4 square meters or 10 square meters. Usually in the UK, they usually have it in square meters and in square feet. Here in Spain, it's usually in square meters. As far as I know, in the United States, they usually describe dimensions, room sizes in square feet, as far as I know. Let's move on to numbers when they have a decimal point, because this is where a lot of people make mistakes with their pronunciation, particularly with the figures after the decimal point. So how would you pronounce this number? I would say 314.76. So firstly, that little dot is pronounced as point. And all of the numbers, all of the figures after the decimal point are pronounced individually. So we would never say 314.76. No, 314.76. And it doesn't matter how long that series of numbers is after the decimal point, although it's unusual to have more than 2, we would say 314.765438. It doesn't matter. Each number is pronounced individually, and I've definitely noticed that many of my students either have doubts about how they should say the numbers after a decimal point, or they're saying them in an unnatural way. So I hope that point is useful for you. Finally, let's look at some fractions. So how would you say this fraction? So we would pronounce this as 2/3. 2/3. So anything after a half, you basically take the ordinal number, add an S, and that becomes your bottom number, the bottom figure. Yeah, so thirds, fourths, fifths, tenths, 20ths, if you want to go that far. Okay, so that's how you form fractions. So how would you pronounce this fraction? That's right, this one is 3/5. 3/5. So, and yeah, that pronunciation of fifth can be quite tricky too. So you might need to practice that a little. So that is it for the tricky numbers and figures lesson. But if you've made it this far, I have a little test question for you and you can answer this in the comments. So use the comments section to write in words how you would pronounce this very big number. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch. I hope you've learned something new or at least had a chance to review how we pronounce these tricky numbers. Thank you very much. Take care and bye for now.